So we're up to chapter 3. Chapter 3 you'll find
There's
that
a few people here who
haven't been here, so we'll have to give the story so far, the summary so far. We're on page 1271. Let me give the story so far. This is the Book of Ruth. We will see if we can finish it this week, because I'm not here next week, so we've got a lot to get through. But the story is, the sort of ostensible story, this simple, straightforward story is a girl converts to Judaism, and a young woman, and ends up becoming the great-grandmother of King David. That's basically in a nutshell. But there's so much more depth. As we explored the first week, we saw that what's going on in the background, the way the story is presented to us textually, the stuff it brings up, is it evokes the problem that's really been there at the core of the whole Jewish project from the days of Avraham, from the days of Abraham. And that is how you can ever deal with kindness, how you can ever behave in a way that's kind without crushing people. Because all acts of kindness involve robbing people of dignity. Every time you care for somebody, or you give them charity, or you do anything like that, you are turning them into a dependent person who gains goods, food, or whatever. You feel fantastic, right? You trade effectively goods for dignity. You're more dignified, they're less dignified. That was the problem, and that was the background issue that's been there for centuries, since Abraham's own nephew Lot, left him because he felt he'd spent decades being this dependent nephew, being raised by Avraham, and wanted to go to the one place on earth that knew that kindness is a terrible thing. And that place was called Sodom. And we saw the derivative culture of Sodom is Moab. And the story opened that there's a big famine and the rich people run to Moab so they don't need to give charity to the poor people. It's sort of an echo of a painful issue. And we discussed how this issue sits in our psyches. All of us struggle with this in different ways. It's the psychological problem, the desire to be independent, the resentment that's created in classes in society, who pays the tax, who receives it. And it's also issues of everyone, teenagers, right, who need to rebel against parents, they can assert their independence, or our relationship with God himself. The simple fact is that built into the subconscious is a resentment against God. And it's a resentment against him giving us the Torah, and it's this incredible desire to assert our independence, because otherwise we're basically figments of his imagination. And something in the religious psyche feels pained by that notion that I'm really God created me, I never had choice. He's told me what to do, I never had choice in that either, so I'm going to rebel. I'm going to assert my own self. And that was there in the Garden of Eden, that was there at the receiving of Torah. This was the problem that we raised in the first chapter. There's all the issues that come up from it. The second chapter saw how Ruth herself seems to start to shift the paradigm. Because although she's now come and converted to the Jewish people, and she's entered now into the lands, and she's got nothing. She's come back with her mother-in-law, whose family had all lost their lives, and she's now entered into Yehuda, into Judea. She's in Bethlehem, in Bethlehem, and she's gathering in the fields exactly in accordance with Jewish law, with the mitzvahs, which is you have to, as you're gathering your crops in the field, you have to allow the poor to come in. But when she gets asked by the landowner about herself, so the landowner tells her, his name's Boaz, how she should be looked after, she should feel free in the field. Instead of saying thank you, she interviews him. She basically says, why are you being nice to me? And had he responded by saying, oh, we feel sorry for you, that would have been the end of the deal. Instead, he said, what are you talking about? We owe you. You've looked after your mother-in-law. You've given up everything to come and join us. You're like a modern-day Avraham, right? By the way, he was fulfilling a very important biblical mitzvah, to love the convert, to love the stranger. Right? It's actually it's spoken 36 times in the Torah in one form or another. It's one of the most discussed mitzvahs in the whole of Torah. And what she says then when she comes home after he's arranged his whole project to manipulate the entire field, he says to her, you're like this modern Abraham, modern everything, and she says, thank you, that's exactly what I was looking for. I don't want to just be one of your maidservants. And then when she comes back in the evening and her mother-in-law says, who looked after you today? She says, the guy I looked after is called Boaz. Now in the questions, and that's where the rabbis comment that more than the rich person does to the poor person in charity, the poor person does to the rich person. And Ruth has just begun to teach us a critical lesson, that we have to get to the psychological state where we don't look at who's the giver and who's the taker. Everyone should try and be as independent as possible, but we all need each other. And every act of giving is really an act of sharing and receiving. the act of chesed, the act of kindness, is being created equally by both partners. And this paradigm, as it came up in the questions afterwards, so it's not in the recording for those who are watching on the video here, that came up in the question afterwards, isn't Ruth maybe just taking advantage? And the answer is no. She recognizes, she still bows down, she still says thank you, she recognizes that there's a tremendous act of charity, but she also recognizes, she says to her mother-in-law effectively, he had something to offer me that I needed, but I also had something to offer him that he needed. Dignity, feeling good, becoming a giver. And we went through an exchange together. And this opens up a whole way of thinking that's now going to start to develop and mature and hit fruition in the chapters we're going to look at today. Now, the third chapter opens. In order to understand the third chapter, you need to be aware of a very important biblical law, which I finished last time with, the law of Yibum, the law of surrogate marriage. What's the principle? The principle is that if a man dies childless, in those days the land was transferred primarily through the male lineage, so if he dies childless, the brother can step literally into the shoes of his deceased brother, and the child that's born, as long as they both want to, and as the child that's born out of that relationship is not considered the child of the living brother, but the child of the deceased brother. So it's a very self-sacrificial act. It's asking brother number 2 effectively to have the child of brother number 1. And it's an act we Ashkenazim certainly don't do it nowadays at all. There is an opt-out, right? They can do a process called chalitza where they just don't go ahead. And that's what we tend to do nowadays. But the principle behind it is a very selfless act. Now, interestingly enough, before the Torah was given, this principle would apply not just to brothers, but any family member. And now, once the Torah is given, very close relatives are no longer allowed. The only close relative is a brother. But further out, family members can do something conceptually similar. It's not the same thing. Now, why is that important? Because both Boaz and Ruth are actually children or great-great-great-great-grandchildren of a similar sort of arrangement. What do we mean by that? Is that what's Ruth's lineage? Do you remember where Ruth comes from? She comes from the tribe of Moab, but Moab has a very I don't know what word to use, but a very, I guess in straightforward street slang it says dodgy, but an ostensibly dodgy. It looks wrong, but what happened is that Lot, remember the town of Sodom gets destroyed. Lot survives. You remember his wife turns into this pillar of salt. The only people who survive are Lot and his 2 daughters. And they end up in a cave afraid to leave. And as far as they're concerned, the world's been destroyed. So what do they realize? The girls realize, one second, our husbands have gone. We're not going to have children. They get their father drunk. And that night, when he's drunk, the elder daughter has a relationship with him. And the child born is called Moab, which becomes literally means from the father. It's a bit of a giveaway there. And becomes the Moabite civilization later. Now, if all that's true, well, that is all true, that's a type of Yibum. Lot was drunk, he wasn't necessarily aware of what's going on, but in a sense, he was rebuilding the family, right, as the close relative. Also, Boaz comes from the lineage of Yehuda. What's the story that happened there? Do any of you remember the Torah story there with Yehuda? 4th son of Jacob, 4th son of Yaakov. So he marries his children off to a woman called Tamar. He marries his eldest off to a woman called Tamar. The eldest boy dies. The rabbis say he was not righteous. He tried to use the relationship for his own gratification, but not for her gratification and for having children. And basically he dies, and then the next child marries, but the next child says he realizes it won't be his child. So he also manages to ensure that they have a way, he ensures that they never have children. And he also dies. Now Yehuda's getting nervous at this point. He's lost 2 boys in a marriage to this woman Tamar. He thinks this is a bad idea, and he's not sure whether to marry his 3rd son off to Tamar or not. While she's noticing that this is taking now a long time, no one's marrying her, she seems to have some insight, prophetic or otherwise, that she's meant to have a child through the family. And when Yehuda himself, who didn't have a wife at this phase, Yehuda himself is around, she dresses up and covers her face, as was quite common in Bedouin communities in those days, or equivalent, and ends up one way or the other in a relationship with Yehuda. Right? It's pre-biblical, so the laws are very different. Doesn't have to be marriage. In those days, they could do shorter-term arrangements. Yehuda never discovers who this is. She becomes pregnant. He assumes she's had adultery because she's meant to be married to the 3rd child. And anyway, it's a long story, but the bottom line is, at the court case, at the trial, she returns some items that he'd left with her. And she doesn't name him. She says, whoever is the owner of these items, it's them. Now, at that moment, he could have just denied it, let her go to what would have been a death penalty in those days. And instead, he stands up and says, wow, he understands exactly what's happened. He realizes that she was in the right, he was in the wrong. And he used the word sadka mimeni, she is more righteous than I am. But the Talmud learns many things from this episode. First of all, her willingness to go to death rather than shame somebody. Second of all, his willingness to admit in public, even though it humiliates himself. And even though they may not have got everything right up till that point, what happens in that moment is they have children, and their children's 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 children, they become Boaz in this story, and later on going to become King David. So both lineages appear to be tainted by relationships that are very questionable, but ultimately were the principle of people trying to restore family when they thought there was no other way or no other hope. Okay, that's the little background story. All the way through King David's lineage, by there's always these little question marks emerge. Why is another discussion. But for now, what's going to happen is this. Look at the beginning of chapter 3. Naomi says to her daughter-in-law, my daughter, I want to find somebody good for you. Right? This is page 1271. I want to find security for you, a wonderful husband. Again, you could just imagine Naomi as the great Jewish mother or mother-in-law. I want to find you a great shidduch. That's how she starts. And so you can imagine Ruth thinking, wow, I'm looking out who's top of the list over here, who's the exciting young guy around the town over here. Well, says Naomi, actually, there's a man called Boaz. Oh, that old guy, the old prophet, whatever, he's your age, Naomi, he's not really my age, But is it? No, Boaz, not only that, Boaz is one of our relatives. You know the guy who you were in the field with? He's going tonight to the threshing floor, to the barley threshing floor. Why was he going to the threshing floor that night? The rabbis tell us part of the reason was to actually make sure, in the days of the threshing season, there were lots of men in the field, young men, young women. He wanted to make sure nothing was going to go wrong, so he himself went down that night, which has a little bit of an irony in terms of what's going to come next. But this appears to be a contradiction. On the one hand, Naomi's saying, Ruth, I'm looking out for a guy who's perfect for you. And then she's saying, well, actually, I'm really looking out for a guy who's great for us. Because if you marry him, he's a relative and he's wealthy. He might buy back all our lands. He might take care of us. And you think, that's very manipulative. You're pretending you're looking out for your daughter-in-law's good, and you're actually looking out for your own good. Except that we remember that Ruth is different. Ruth lives in a world where it's not about givers and takers and zero sum. It's possible to create worlds where everybody's a winner. And Naomi sensed this in her. We could have something that's perfect for you and perfect for me. It's not one or the other. Okay, but how's this going to work? Well, now look at the next verse. This one you actually have to look at inside. You'll notice, if you notice on verse 3, Pasuk Gimel in the Hebrew, there's square brackets a few times in the middle of the verse. And for the next few verses, you'll see a bunch of square brackets. What are these square brackets? So let me tell you what they are. They are what's called in Hebrew Kri Ksiv. It means that the text is written, and the law is you're meant to write the text one way, but the person who's reading it is meant to read it slightly differently. What's going on over here? Naomi says to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, go and wash yourself, anoint yourself in oils or perfumes or whatever, and place your clothing on you, and then v'yoradet hagoren, you should go down to the threshing floor, to the barn. But the text in brackets, the way it's written, v'yoradeti hagoren, I will go down to the threshing floor. 1 second. So you should go down, but I'm going down. Do you understand? What is she saying? What do you think that means?
About a continued family.
It means you're going down, but in a way it's me going down. In a way you're going down as a surrogate for me, on behalf of me. Right? That's what's happening, right? You're going to go to the barn, but it's going to be me. You're going on my behalf. That's like you're asking a lot of Ruth, right? And then what happens next? And it'll be, right, that you'll know the place where he's lying there, and then you come and uncover his feet. V'shochavd, and you should lie down, and he'll tell you what to do. But look at what the square bracket says. V'shochavti, I will lie down. Ruth, you're going down here, but is it you or is it me? On the one hand, she's saying, you should go. This is for you. And on the other hand, she's saying you should go on my behalf. So there's two different relationships happening in one over here. What a strange setup. And look how Ruth replies. She says to her, verse 5, all that you say a lie to me. And look at that square brackets. The word to me doesn't exist in the written text, only the pronounced text. Ruth is saying, I get it. All that you talk about, tell me, I will be there, but I also won't be there. Do you see how beautiful this is, by the way? This is unbelievable. You can just think, so there's a text with the written version one way, and it's written one way and pronounced the other way. Why would they do that? I don't know. And just move on. But if you listen carefully, you begin to realize what's going on. It's a common theme. It's a double meaning. There's two layers of the story happening here. On level one, Ruth is the one who's going in. On level two, she's a surrogate for Naomi. Now this, wow. But notice this, so you would say Ruth is essentially being asked to be used, to be passive, to be giving herself up for her mother-in-law. Except that she exactly asserts herself. First of all, in the pronounced text, she's there at every stage of the way. But she's going to really show her mother-in-law, I'm in this fully. Watch what she does next. She did exactly not what her mother-in-law said. Her mother-in-law said, get dressed and go down to the barn. Ruth doesn't do that. She says, what she does is she goes down first, then she gets all dressed up. Why do you think she reversed the order? What would happen if she didn't reverse the order? What happens if she's walking around town all dressed up and then goes down to the barn? People are going to be a bit suspicious. Why is this woman walking around town dressed in her finest? In those days, you went out to the field in your work clothes. She's dressed in her Shabbos clothes, in a nice, what's going on? She says, Naomi, I understand this stuff better than you do. Now you got it. The idea I get, I'm going to do your idea, but let me do it my way. I know. She's completely inserting herself. She's invested. This is not about her passively just obeying her mother-in-law. She is absolutely assertive in the story. She is completely, so she's completely invested. So on the one hand, you think she's giving up. On the other hand, she's not giving anything up. She's completely asserting herself. This is all about her. But Ruth can do that. Ruth can be 100% about Ruth and 100% about Naomi at the same time. Watch what happens next. Boaz eats, verse 7 over here, drinks, his heart is good. He goes to lie down at the edge of the heaps of grain. Vatovo balot. Now listen, if those of you who can read Hebrew, follow along in the Hebrew, because this is absolutely golden. Vatovo balot literally means she came stealthily. But what does that word balot also look like if you take away the vowels? Balot. Who's Lot? Lot was the nephew of Abraham, do you remember, who left Abraham because he didn't like this whole kindness business. She comes within Lot, within her ancestor. Lot, the man who rebelled. Do you remember what's going on? In the background, this is unbelievable. The whole background story of this was Lot ruptured the relationship with Abraham, said, I hate this kindness stuff. She, the great-great-great-great-granddaughter of Lot, the Moabite, she is coming back and she's saying, I can resolve the problem he said. Isn't this beautiful? You just see how the text does these incredible things, these little beautiful hints that bring the whole story to life. Okay, she comes stealthily, she uncovers his feet. Then verse 8, Vayhi b'chatzi halayla, was at midnight. What other events happen in Jewish history at midnight? Coming out of Egypt, exactly as is at midnight. In fact, for those of you who remember, in the Pesach and Seder night, at the end of the Seder, there's a lot of songs that people sing. One of them is Vayhi b'chatzi halayla, all the great stories that happen at midnight. They're all to do with redemption, right? And the pathway towards what eventually becomes the Davidic monarchy and Mashiach. So this is very, very, and of course, the first actual midnight they read about in the Torah, Vayicholek halayla, the night is divided, is when Abraham went to rescue Lot. Lot had been captured, right? And Abraham went to rescue him, and as the night is divided, that's why exactly the midnight is when he rescues him. So there's so many hints here, backwards and forwards through the biblical, it's like a tapestry, all the threads being woven together. Okay, the man is afraid, he's awoken, he's got a woman at his feet, he says, and listen to these words, this is so unbelievable. Like you could just read this and say, okay, until you realize everything we've said, and suddenly these words come to life. Vayomi says, me at, who are you? What does that question mean? So on a simple level, it means, who's here? I can hear somebody's in the room, who's here? But on a deeper level, what's he asking? Who are you? You've come as two different personalities here. Like, do you see what's going on? Do you see the power of this? That's a real question. Are you coming as you? Are you coming as your mother-in-law? Who are you? And she says, I am Ruth, your maidservant, and you should spread your wings over your maidservant because you are a redeemer. Now remember, when she originally came to the land, the first time, and he saw it in the field, those who were with us last week will remember, he said, you have come under the wings of the divine presence. So she's repeating the phrase, right? You're going to put your wing over me. What's she really saying to him? You're going to be like the divine presence. I'm inviting you to do something that makes you like the divine presence itself. Do you follow what's happening here? This story is so interwoven with multiple layers of meaning here. What she's saying is, I'm about to ask you to do a favor. I'm about to ask you to reconstruct our family, to marry me. You'll be a surrogate for the original father of the family, Elimelech. I'll be a surrogate for the original mother of the family, Naomi, and together we're going to rebuild their family. But I'm asking you the favor, and you're going to give us our land and look after us and so on. So I'm going to ask you a huge favor, but I'm also offering you a level of greatness. I'm offering you to become a redeemer. I'm offering you to become like the presence of God. And she means it. Remember, for Ruth, this is not about who's the giver and who's the taker. Everyone can win in the same interaction. And look how Boaz responds. This is absolutely staggering, unless you've been following the story so far. And look what he says. He understands. She's saying, please keep it. He says, may you be blessed, Hashem, my daughter, verse 10. Your kindness now is greater than your original kindness. What was the original kindness? That you let me be a giver in the field, or that you looked after your mother-in-law, whichever it is. You are doing me the favor. You could have gone, because now forget your mother-in-law rebuilding the family. You could have gone after any man in town. Everybody recognized how great you are, rich or poor. So now my daughter says, don't worry. Everything you say I'm going to do, because everybody knows how great you are. But there's a problem. The problem is there's a family member closer than me. If we're talking about rebuilding families here, law has to always go by the closest relative. Closest relative gets the first option. We have to go to him first. So I'm sorry, don't worry, I'm not rejecting you, but we can't go any further till we wait till the morning. And that's what he says. Then there's some amazing little hints over here. I'm just going to jump a little bit through the chapter. So where are we now? Page 1272. Okay. And he says that's it. He says, so she stayed there till the morning, and then she went back. But look at verse 15. Before she goes back, he says, stretch out your apron, and hold it, and he measures out 6 barley corns, and she comes back to the city. Now, why 6? Because 6 hints at all the major kings she's going to have in the future. Again, was that prophetic? Was it subconscious? Either way, she comes back to her mother-in-law. Look at this, verse 16. Everyone look at verse 16. This is absolutely incredible. What does verse 16 say? She comes to her mother. What's her mother-in-law's reaction? She says, who are you? Same question. Now, of course she knows. She even says, who are you, my daughter? Of course she knows. You see, if you just read this text without all this stuff, you'd say, what a strange question. Who are you, my daughter? I imagine your parents say that to you. Who are you, my son? Who are you? No, who are you? Who have you come back as? Are you Ruth, or did you go as me? And look at what her reply is. She doesn't reply, she doesn't answer. She tells her everything that man had done. And in other words, he's interested in a relationship with me potentially. But here's the 6 barleys. He told me to give this to you. In other words, he understood this is about me and him, but it's about you and him. The selfless and yet self is all there. This is exactly what's going on. Ki amar, because he said Eli to me, and in the square brackets, the word is gone. I'm there, and I'm not there, exactly as you asked me to go down. Isn't it so beautiful? And he said, don't come empty-handed to your mother-in-law. So Naomi says, fine, sit still. This is an amazing line, by the way, till we know how it's going to fall, because the man won't be silent until he's done. So chapter 3 ends in the following position. Everybody's done what they need to do. Everybody's in position, but we don't know what's going to be. And this is the moment where we say, Hashem, now you're in charge. We've all done our bits. You're now in charge of the world, which is, by the way, exactly what later on in history King David's going to be all about. King David's role as a king is never to assert himself. It's an amazing thing that he is anointed king 3 different times. First, the prophet tells him he's going to be a king. Samuel tells him he's going to be king. Then the people of Judea, of Yehuda, appoint him king. He never takes it until the whole nation appoints him. Then he becomes king. And the minute there's the beginning of a murmuring of a rebellion, he leaves. His role as a king is very interesting. In fact, the role of a Jewish king, the role of a Davidic king, is not meant to have political power and control over people. That's a very small side issue. The role of a king of Malchus is to build out of many people one living, beating heart, one living entity, one organism. A Malchus, a kingship, is when all the pieces come together and operate as one. So the goal is literally to let all the pieces fall together. And that's exactly what they're doing right now. It's like God is the Melech, God is the integrator, and we're just going to sit, we've done our little pieces. Now let's see which way this falls, what's going to be. Chapter 4 opens. Boaz goes up to the gate, and he dwells there. V'hine ha-goel over, and the Redeemer walks past. The one that Boaz had spoken about, and he says, okay, come on, come over here, Mr. X, and sit down. Anyway, he takes 10 elders of the town, so they've now got a court case, and he says in verse 3, look, there's a field that belongs to our brother Elimelech, do you want to redeem it? And basically turns around and says yes. And then Boaz says, okay, but there's a problem. Why do we redeem ancestral family land? So the family will have it in perpetuity. But remember, there's nobody, if you just take the land, it'll be yours. Once Naomi dies, there's no heirs, it'll just be yours. That's a selfish act. In order to be truly selfish, you must marry Ruth. Because then you can also build the family that will then retain their land. And look at his reaction. This is an amazingly painful reaction. Verse 6, and the Redeemer says, Lo uchal ligol li, I cannot redeem for me, pen ashes nachalasi, lest I destroy my inheritance. What does he mean? He's saying a few things. First of all, he's saying, I don't want to marry her because it'll be terrible for my future reputation. What's wrong with her future reputation? Well, remember where the town was at in the early chapters. There was a lot of selfishness. There was class tension. There was a lot of dare we say, xenophobia, right? When they came back from the outside, they didn't treat strangers very nicely. They're going to say, like, Ruth, she's a Moabite. I mean, you should know, by the way, the reason they had this court assembled was because there's a law in the Torah, you cannot marry a Moabite, even if they convert. Do you know that? Why not? Because so long as Moabite civilization was there, it was so antagonistic against the concept of charity and kindness that the Torah itself says that you can't bring something like that into the people. But what they ruled over here is that was only true for the men. Moabite women were allowed in. It was the men who had expressed this culture, not the women. And therefore they were allowed. But he says, I don't care if it's allowed. I don't want the reputation. I don't want to be, you can just imagine one of these like racist sort of guys, I don't want this Moabite in my family. I don't want it to be embarrassing for us. It'll wreck our social status and all these other things. And do you know what the most beautiful irony of this is? The man who rejected Ruth because he cared so much about his name, his future reputation, is the only man in the whole of Tanakh basically called Mr. Anonymous. He gets the name in this Ploni Almoni, which is the way of saying Mr. Anonymous. We've ripped his name away. You rejected her because your reputation, that'll be your reputation forever. But you rejected Ruth. We won't even know your name. And the words he says is, I cannot redeem for me. It's all about me. If it's all about you, forget it. All about me doesn't belong in the Jewish people. Does that mean we have to all sacrifice everything? No. Now look what happens. Then, verse 8, the Redeemer says, you know what? You do it. So verse 9, Boaz says to the elders, he says, okay guys, you're all witnesses that I'm marrying her, but I'm also buying back all the lands of Elimelech. Right, also Ruth the Moabite, the wife of Machlon and Kilion, she's going to be my wife. We're going to bring back the names of the family, right? That it shall never be lost in the Jewish people. You're witnesses today. And now listen to the people's reaction. Boaz and Ruth have both come up with this new paradigm, this new way of thinking. The world is not about givers and takers. The world is all of us building together. If you receive, you give. Each of them is fully actualizing their self right now, and each of them is fully giving, and it's all the same thing. And it's having an impact. The town is gathered. The town is watching all of this. And the town has understood how Boaz, the great spiritual leader of the people, has basically told this guy that he's in the wrong. has gone himself and he's going to do this. And people are beginning to realize her greatness, his greatness, and all that they're achieving. And it's starting to change the people. Watch what happens next. Remember, these are the people who at the beginning, the town's falling apart. At the beginning, Boaz had to introduce emergency measures to get everyone to greet each other by saying, God is with you. And now listen to this town. The elders, everybody, may God give this woman, the woman who comes into your house, not long ago we treated her like a stranger, but we've changed our attitudes. She is going to be like Rachel and Leah. Who are Rachel and Leah? Two great matriarchs of the Jewish people, the wives of Yaakov. Asher banu shteim es Yisrael, who built the Jewish people. We no longer look down on the stranger. This convert has come and taught us so much. She's healed us as a people. We've changed the way we look at one another. She is like a new energy in the Jewish people, like one of the Torah's mothers of the Jewish nation. And I'll tell you something else. Which area of the land was this? Which tribe were these people from? Do you remember? Yehuda, Judah. Now, does anybody here remember which mother does Yehuda come from? Which of the mothers does Judah come from? That's, forget the real memory caps on it if anybody's learnt it. If you go back into the Torah, you'll see they're from Leah. And do you remember there are always tensions between the children of Rachel, Rachel, and the children of Leah? Yehuda was involved in the sale of Joseph, Joseph is from Rachel. There was tensions always. And later on the kingdom splits in those lines as well. So till now, in this point, it's been like a competition. The children of Yehuda is the main tribe of the children of Leah versus the children of Rachel. But something remarkable happens in this verse. It's so subtle. If Rashi didn't point it out to us in his commentary on the Torah, you wouldn't even notice it. Which mother did they put first in the list in this verse over here in verse 11? Rachel. The children of Leah, who've been in tension with the children of Rachel for centuries, have now just reconciled themselves. We can put Rachel first. Isn't that incredible? Because we've learned to realize it's not zero-sum. The fact that Yaakov loves Rachel doesn't mean he doesn't love Leah. In fact, doesn't mean we're all, Asher banu shnei, listen to the verse, that both of them built the Jewish people. It's not a competition. If you are elevated, I am not thereby denigrated. You can be put in a position and we all gain from it. If the heart's doing well in the body, the liver doesn't suffer. It does quite well too. And if the liver's doing well, but that's how we're now viewing everything. And who taught us this? Ruth and Boaz, but primarily Ruth. She's given us this whole new way of looking at everything. Nothing is competition anymore. I can admit that you're tremendous in this talent that I'm not, and it doesn't have to bother me. You've got something to offer, I don't. I've got something to offer, you don't. Put Rachel first, Leah first, it doesn't matter. We're suddenly, a whole consciousness is changing. We're changing the way we think, not only as ourselves as a community, but we're changing the way we look at one another as part of a nation. I don't need you to be like me. I'm not threatened by you being different to me. We're suddenly all one by all being different. And this is just so beautiful. And this, they call it the Korah. And now look what happens. And then they say your house should be like Peretz, the one who Tamar gave birth to Yehuda. The story I read to you, I told you about a few minutes ago. There now all the people are conscious. This is amazing. This is like our ancestor Yehuda, Tamar, where they were willing to sacrifice for each other. This is what's going on over here. And may Hashem give you child from this child. Now look what happens. They get married, they have a child, and verse 14. Remember who's out the picture at this stage. Who's missing in the picture? Naomi. Wasn't this whole marriage about, now the women say to Naomi, I remember when Naomi came back, originally the whole town was resentful of her. She'd been this rich woman who'd left town when they all needed charity. When she came back in, they were talking about her, they weren't talking to her, and she had to say, call me bitter, don't call me sweet. Naomi means sweet. Now they all turn to her, and they say, Baruch Hashem, blessed is God, who has not forsaken a redeemer for you today, and the name should be called in the Jewish people. And over the next page, this is the one this child is going to look after you in your old age, right? Because your daughter-in-law who you love has given birth for you. So you see, they're all now realizing this perfect marriage, which is all about these Boaz and Ruth, is also about you and Naomi. It's a say, right? She's better for you than 7 sons. And Naomi, listen, this is unbelievable, verse 16, Naomi took the child, took him and nursed him. What? Naomi never had this child. She's an elderly woman. What do you mean she nursed the child? So there's layers of meaning here. On a simple layer, yes, it may be a miracle. Ruth had attached herself so deeply to Naomi that somehow when Ruth has this child, Naomi's body's able to feed it. Or it means when Ruth feeds the child, it's like Naomi is. Whatever level of meaning it has, it's the same thing. Ruth has delivered Naomi's child. And the women, verse 17, they called the child saying, a child has been born to Naomi. That's what it meant. Ruth was surrogated for Naomi. And they called him Oved, father of Yishai, father of David. And then we go through the lineage. This is the Judean lineage. Peretz gave birth to Chetzron. Chetzron gave birth to Ram, to Aminadav, to Nachshon, to Salmon, to Boaz, to Oved, to Yishai, to David. The man who will build out of the tribes one nation. So where's Ruth? She's just done the ultimate act of self-sacrifice. And she has disappeared. Ruth hasn't disappeared. Ruth has become the whole story. The whole thing is called Ruth. Do you see the power of this? Ruth was 100% Ruth, and Ruth was 100% Naomi. Ruth was 100% doing this because this is a relationship that's perfect for her, and 100% doing it, this relationship is perfect for her mother-in-law. This is 100% her child, and it's 100% her mother-in-law's child. This is 100% what's good for her, and that's how she looks at everything now. And that's how Boaz looks at everything, and that's how everybody looks at everything. And now we're ready to give birth to the lineage that will bring Mashiach. And this is the answer to the question that Lot asked Abraham right at the beginning. How can you do kindness without winners and losers? The answer is forget these winners and losers. I need you, you need me. Every act we do together is an act of sharing, an act where both of us gain. Every time I look at you, I don't see a competitor. I see a partner. I see your success as building me. Right? That's exactly the way to look at the world. Then we can have a relationship with God himself. God says, I offer you a Torah, I offer you a life. Don't go, oh, but it's uneven. Who cares it's uneven? I can actually do something for God that God can't do, which is receive. Let his light shine in this world. Make the choice to give myself over to him. Make the choice to let him give to me. That's active giving too. I can share creation with the creator of the universe. I can be God's conduit for bringing his will into the world. And that's how we can receive the Torah. And so Ruth turns Torah from being a gift from God into an act of receiving. And she transforms in doing so. She vindicates the project of Avraham, the missing piece that can now allow us to march forward to bring history to its perfection. And so we've managed to finish an overview, a skimming. There's so many layers, so many things we jumped, and it's painful to do so. Like I say, hopefully if we've done this well, you'll go yourselves and study much more. But also hopefully giving you the structure of this incredible book. I'm going to stop now if there's any questions. We have 2 minutes, I think, for questions. So do we have 2 minutes for questions, or have we finished? We're out of time. Okay, maybe 3 minutes even then. Okay. What questions do we have of this? Okay, if we don't have questions, also fine, also fantastic. If you want to come up with our questions in the brief break, but I'm going to stop over here. I hope this has been of incredible value to me. I've loved learning it with everybody here, and I won't be here next week, but everyone should have a wonderful Shavuos and really inculcate the messages of the Book of Ruth.